Okay, let's dive into what might be the single greatest survival story ever recorded. Seriously, it's an incredible tale of leadership, of beating impossible odds, and really just finding the absolute limits of human endurance. And it all centers on one man, Sir Ernest Shackleton, and his legendary ship, the Endurance. So, just to give you a feel for what we're dealing with, Shackleton said this to a young stowaway they found on board. Now, he was joking, mostly, but it tells you everything, doesn't it? The stakes on this journey were life and death, right from the very beginning. So, what kind of mission would even start with a warning like that? Well, it was the hunt for one of the last great unclaimed prizes of what they called the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. Their goal was just monumental. They wanted to be the very first people to walk across the entire Antarctic continent, from coast to coast. We're talking 2,900 kilometers. That's over 1,800 miles through a frozen wasteland. And remember, this is an era with no GPS, no high-tech gear, nothing but pure grit and a compass. So the plan was pretty straightforward. Sail into the Weddell Sea, make landfall, and start the big trek. But, the Weddell Sea is notorious. It's this swirling trap of thick pack ice, and, well, it had other ideas. Everything went wrong, and it went wrong shockingly fast. They left in November 1914, and by January, their ship was completely stuck in the ice. For months, they were just frozen in place, helpless, as the immense pressure of the ice literally started to squeeze the life out of their ship. By October, it was cleared the Endurance was doomed, and a month later, she was gone. Can you even imagine watching that happen? Your ship, your home, your one and only connection to the rest of the human race, just getting swallowed by the ice. The crew stood there and watched the whole thing. It wasn't just losing a boat. It was like their lifeline to the entire world had just been snipped. So this is the situation now. You've got 28 men, stranded thousands of kilometers from anyone, just castaways on a floating sheet of ice. The original grand expedition, that was over before it even really began. The new mission was much, much simpler. Just survive. What came next was an ordeal that's almost impossible to believe. Their whole lives were now controlled by the whim of the drifting ice and the few supplies they managed to rescue from the ship. And just let this number sink in for a second. 497 days. That's almost a year and a half. A year and a half that these men lived on shifting, breaking ice and in tiny, open lifeboats before they felt solid, non-moving ground under their feet again. I mean, their day-to-day reality was just brutal. Food was rationed down to almost nothing. They hunted seals and penguins for food and fuel, and yeah, when things got truly desperate, they had to kill the sled dogs they loved for food. Through all of this, Shackleton's true genius shone through. He kept a routine, he kept up morale, because he knew that a psychological breakdown could kill them just as fast as the cold. So, after this agonizing journey in 3 little lifeboats, rowing through freezing waters, they finally made it. Land. But that relief, it didn't last long. This was Elephant Island, a barren, windswept piece of rock, totally outside of any shipping lanes. No one was coming to rescue them because no one on Earth even knew they were still alive, let alone where they were. And that brings us to the next impossible problem, right? They've survived being trapped on the ice, but they've just traded one prison for another. So, completely cut off from the world, how on earth do you get home from here? Shackleton knew that if they stayed put, they'd just die a slow death. Their only real hope was to go get help themselves. And that meant launching one of the most daring and dangerous sea voyages in history. So he was staring at 2 terrible options. They could try to sail for the nearest land, but that meant going straight into the teeth of the Drake Passage, one of the most violent stretches of ocean on the planet. Or they could try a much longer journey, 1,300 kilometers, to the whaling stations on South Georgia Island. It was farther, but he hoped the winds and currents might be on their side. He chose the longer route. It was a huge, huge gamble. Honestly, the plan sounds completely insane. Just look at these steps. Each one on its own is an incredible long shot. Sail for over 800 miles in a tiny open boat. Survive 100-foot waves. Find a tiny speck of an island in a vast ocean. And then, because they'd probably land on the wrong side, cross a mountain range that no human had ever even mapped, let alone crossed. So Shackleton picked 5 of his best men, and they climbed into this little 22-foot lifeboat, the James Caird. And before he left, he promised the 22 men who stayed behind that he would come back for them. All they could do was trust him and wait. And against every single odd, that desperate gamble actually worked. But reaching South Georgia, that was only half the battle. Now Shackleton had to keep his promise. The willpower here is just unbelievable. After somehow surviving that boat journey, Shackleton and 2 others still had to cross the island's frozen interior. They had no tents, just a rope and a small axe. They trekked for 36 hours straight over glaciers and mountains no one had ever seen before. To put that in perspective, the next team to do that crossing was in 1955, and they were expert mountaineers with all the modern gear. So when these 3 figures stumbled into the Stromness whaling station, they were unrecognizable. They were gaunt, their faces blackened from blubber smoke, their hair matted, clothes in tatters. But they had made it. And Shackleton's very first thought wasn't about rest. It was about the 22 men still waiting for him on Elephant Island. And what about those men he left behind? Well, for more than 4 months, they waited. They lived under 2 overturned boats led by Frank Wild, Shackleton's second-in-command. And every single morning, Wild would tell his men the exact same thing. Pack your things, boys. The boss may come today. That is just a masterclass in leadership, in keeping hope alive when you have absolutely no reason for it. Okay, so let's just focus on the numbers for a second. When the Endurance first got trapped in the ice, there were 27 men in the expedition crew under Shackleton's command. And after nearly 2 years stranded in Antarctica, after their ship was crushed and sank, after surviving on the ice, crossing the world's most dangerous ocean in a lifeboat and trekking over uncharted mountains, this is the only number that really matters. 27. He brought every single one of his men home. The original mission was a total failure, but he succeeded at the one that counted most. And in this absolutely stunning modern ending to the story, the Endurance itself was found in 2022. It's resting almost 10,000 feet down at the bottom of the Weddell Sea, nearly perfectly preserved by the freezing, dark water. It's like a silent wooden monument to this incredible story. Which really just leaves us with this question. The expedition, yeah, it failed to cross Antarctica, but it gave us something so much more powerful. This timeless story of a leader who absolutely refused to give up on his people and a crew that never, ever lost faith in him. It just makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the real limits of what we can endure?